So when I heard the term just talk at the beginning of the planning of this meeting, I was asking myself, just talk? And then I started thinking through what the playing of words really meant. And I realized that this was a very creative way of addressing issues that are taken for granted. And that's why I very much look forward to this conversation, just talk, where we are talking about issues of justice in a way that may appear ordinary. But the participants who are here, and of course those who are going to facilitate our conversations, are no ordinary participants. They are no ordinary facilitators. They are some of the best people we have in the faith community, but also from civil society, who can enrich our conversations.
We just have a short video and greetings from the General Secretary, Samuel DeWitt, I hope I pronounced the surname right, and the co-sponsor, Reverend Dr. Ivan Karutas. Thank you.
Good day. I am Reverend Dr. Iva Carruthers, General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. And on behalf of the Proctor Conference, I am so delighted to affirm our support and our commitment to the Just Talk event and the commemoration of the 1995 Beijing Platform for Action. We know how critical it is for us to center equality and gender justice as an ongoing goal of sustainability of communities and families, and of course, humane and compassionate relationships in the midst of all of our diversity. I trust that the convening that is going on in Harare will be remembered as a pivotal moment on this journey to justice, and I am indeed very, very grateful for the opportunity to offer our support. It is ongoing, and know that, and I am sorry I'm not able to be with you physically, but do know that we are with you spiritually. May you have a blessed gathering and convening, and may we all be collectively empowered by this moment and this call to action. God bless you all.
What I would propose, and this is what was suggested originally, is that we will have each one of our panelists give their short input, which is about 7 minutes. And from that 7 minutes, we are going to engage them, ask some questions, and if possible, I would want to open up that also the audience may ask questions or engage our panelists. So without any further ado, may I ask Reverend Lydia Neshangwe to share her reflections first.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mtata. It is interesting that 7 minutes has been given to a preacher woman. I shall try to be good this time. So to the reference book members, once again, welcome to Zimbabwe. And this is a platform that we happily and gladly welcome in our country, for it is a cause that is just a just cause. So what I am talking about in 7 minutes is women in power and decision making. Women in power and decision making. I happen to fall into that bracket of a woman in power and decision making on various governance bodies, as well as church leadership, etc., etc. I shall be using the biblical model of Deborah, what I call the Deborah model from Judges 4, verse 4. We go to Judges 4, verse 4. It's a simple verse that describes Deborah, and it says that she was a prophetess, comma, a wife, Lapido, comma, and a judge for the people of Israel. And so already in those three roles, we see an intersection of various elements that intersectionality is what I want to focus on, because as women in leadership, as women in power, there are three elements of that intersectionality that I want to highlight. And the first one is the spirituality. Now, I believe that the source of your power is important. For politicians, their source of power is also important. For those of us in religious circles, the source of our power is important. And so even for women leaders, it's important for any woman leader to ask herself, what is my source of power? Now, in religious circles, we talk about shifting ground, and we talk about rocky ground. Now, there are some unreliable sources of power, and especially for women in leadership. For example, if your source of power is education, you will soon find that education is limited for some of the spaces that you find yourself in and some of the contexts that you find yourself in. If your source of power is the people, you will find that sometimes people let you down. If your source of power is privilege, and some of us are born into privilege, but privilege changes. At one time you may be in privilege, but at another time you're not in privilege. So it depends, what is your source of power? And even for those who are in non-religious spaces, if you're a woman in power, you need to ask yourself, what is my source of power? Because that source of power will determine how you become resilient, how you persevere, how you stay in the game, and how you keep going, depending on your source of power. And the second element of the intersectionality is femininity. Now, Deborah was a prophetess, that was her spirituality. But the second thing is her femininity. And I love to talk about this. I hear that Dr. Chitando loves to talk about healthy masculinities. I like to talk about healthy femininity, because there are some unhealthy ways of being a feminine. And so with healthy femininities, each and every woman leader needs to maintain her femininity, needs to protect and guard jealously her femininity. Because you are made a woman, not by mistake. It was intentional, and there's something that you have to give as a woman. And we women who are in leadership need to resist the temptation to be turned into men. And that is a temptation that is cast upon us on a daily basis in the councils that we lead, when we travel, when we speak, when we engage, when we make decisions. There's always this temptation for us to turn into a man in order to be acceptable. And I want to say to us that we should resist that temptation. It starts with simple things. Sometimes you're expected to dress like a man. You can see how Dr. Mtata is dressed. And sometimes people want me to appear looking something like that. And they say it looks professional. It looks good in the pictures. But that's male dressing. And so what we need to do as women is to appear looking professional and feminine. So that in the end we show the world that we're able to lead while maintaining our own femininity. Another aspect of femininity is personality. You do not have to be harsh and rough to be a woman leader. Lead from your personality. In the same way that men lead from their personalities. Some of these male leaders are extroverts. Some of them are introverts. And the world allows them to lead as they are. Allow yourself to lead from the personality that God also gave you. You do not have to be over-ambitious or over-competitive in an unhealthy manner in order for you to be successful. You do not have to be arrogant or full of egocentric in order to be successful. So you have to maintain your own femininity, because it's a gift from God. If God gave you a compassionate heart, some of the church councils that I sit on, when people start to fight, and I sit and I watch, and I see the fighting going on, sometimes when I stand up and bring in my sense of peacefulness, my sense of mediation, that may be the thing that sometimes saves the day in that particular meeting. And yet the world does not say that compassion and peace-loving ways are the ways to be. And if that's who you are as a woman, if those are the gifts that God has given you, lead from your femininity. And thirdly, community. It is absolutely important for each woman in power or in decision-making to be able to build their own community. And there are 3 levels of community that we need. Number 1, we need female champions. Fellow female champions who work and accompany us and work with us, and we can talk about the challenges, we can talk about ways of overcoming the challenges. Those female companions are an absolute necessity. Secondly, we need male champions. There is no success in gender justice if there are no males speaking out. It's simply because it's a patriarchal world. In many ways, it's a man's world. And so we need the men to speak out, to speak up, because they have the social capital, because they have the privilege, because they have the spaces of power. And so when we speak out as women for justice, I must have on my left a woman, I must have on my right a man. That balances out my gender justice agenda. And thirdly, we must have contextual champions. So if you're in education, find those in education, whether male or female, who will champion for you. If you are in health, if you are in, let's say, religion, whichever field you are in, find those experts, find people in those areas. And then you'll find that because of that community, which will be a healthy community for you, you resist the wrong community. And I will end with a list of the wrong community. There are those around us who want to do gender justice because they want to be politically correct, including our churches. So what they do is they choose a female moderator, and once she's become a female moderator, they go back to the old model. So they will have 10 male moderators, 1 female moderator, then they'll continue with 10 more male moderators. So that if they're ever asked, have you ever had a woman in power? They'll say, yes, we had Lydia Neshangwe. 1 out of 20. That is political correctness. That is not gender justice. And political correctness makes it so that they give you the position, but they do not give you the accompanying respect or cooperation or support. And we as women and all those who are for gender justice need to keep our eyes open for that. Another one in community, the wrong community, are those who practice tolerance. We do not want to be tolerated. We want to be accepted. So if you find in your organization or the church that tolerating women, we don't want to be tolerated. We want to be part of the body and fit in as part of the body. Some will even commodify the woman. So they use the presence of the woman in power as a commodity to say, and then people say, this is what we're doing in Africa. We now have an African woman president for the All Africa Conference of Churches. That is not what you're doing in Africa. And some of those people didn't even vote for me to get into the position. But because I'm already there, they use it as a commodity, as currency. And some of them even use it as image boosting. I've been in situations where they need to take a photograph and they think, oh, we need a woman there, as if you're there for decoration. And we need to stop accepting to be there for decoration. If they don't have enough pretty looking people in that picture, refuse to be in that picture. Another one is performative tokenism. It's a new term that somebody shared with me, somebody who's doing trauma or women who've been traumatized. He says we must be careful that we're not practicing performative tokenism. And that is that, let me give you an example. Thursdays in Black, we may be the kind of organization that perform the right things. We observe Thursdays in Black. We wear the t-shirts. We give out the material. We even have the badges. We even have a slot on TV. We even have the pamphlets. But in actual practice, back at the ranch, back in our churches, back in our homes, back in our extended family, we are not practicing what we are preaching. And of course, the last thing is Kwame Nkrumah. I was coming from Ghana yesterday, from the Ghana elections, and I happened to visit the Kwame Nkrumah Center. And this is what Kwame Nkrumah had to say about judging people. And I'm applying this to when we are judged as women. Kwame Nkrumah said, those who judge us merely by the heights we have achieved would do well to remember the depths from which we started. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I won't summarize or even comment on what she has said. We will have time to discuss. Now I will ask Michelle to come and share information.
I think we can all agree that climate change is very real. And it is by fortune that we're having this conference in Harare. If you step outside where the fans are not, you can feel the heat. And when it rains for a short period, or when it rains very heavily and we've got disastrous effects. Climate change is not something we can say is a hoax. It is happening, it's with us, and it's affecting different communities differently. World over, the vulnerabilities of climate change have been exacerbated on different communities. Here in Zimbabwe or in other developing countries or world over, we've seen floods, we've seen droughts, we've seen heat waves, we've seen an increase in vector-borne diseases. Here in Zimbabwe, we knew certain areas are affected by malaria, but because of the heat, we're beginning to see increases of those diseases in other areas that ordinarily wouldn't be the tropics where we have such vector-borne diseases. We have food insecurity. A lot of our communities are really agricultural based, smallholder farmers, and when the floods and the droughts come, households are left food insecure. Our crops are not doing as well, and these are some of the impacts of climate change that we see. My topic really is to speak about taking action on financing of the climate crisis. When we talk about financing the climate crisis, we're speaking about the need for climate adaptation funds. Climate adaptation funds are really critical for developing countries such as Zimbabwe. It is important to note that COP29, which was dubbed the financial COP standing for the Conference of Parties 29, where 200 countries met in Azerbaijan to discuss a breakthrough agreement on climate finance. There's been an agreement that there will be an increase in terms of the climate finance that is there from 100 billion to 300 billion annually by 2035. Unfortunately, we didn't reach the 100 billion, but we've set a bigger target. Again, it was agreed that we need to secure efforts for all actors to start to work together to scale up finance for developing countries. This is including the private and the public sector to amount to 1.3 trillion per year by 2035. These figures are very nice on paper, very nice when we discuss, but when it comes to putting out that money to assist communities, that's where the challenge is. I cannot begin to stress once again that we need these climate funds. Developing countries need climate adaptation funds. We cannot continue to go to platforms or to indicate how much we need these funds without actually making the action to bring about the funds for us to adapt to climate change. As a Zimbabwe Environmental Law Association, we work with marginalized communities that really face climate change. We work with women, with children, with the youth who are affected. As I spoke about earlier, food insecurity is real. We work with smallholder farmers that really still work with agrarian methods that are still a bit behind. So they really rely on rain-fed agriculture. So when it doesn't rain, how do we expect these households to be fed? How do we expect the children to go to school? How do we expect healthy homes when nothing is being done to assist them to adapt? No irrigation schemes, no sustainable agricultural capacity building for these people. It becomes a reality. And when we're talking about our sustainable development goals and we do not address these issues, it becomes a problem. This is the call that we have, that we all need to start advocating for commitments towards the climate finance that we have. I'll point out again that women now have to walk longer distances. it is not a secret that within the gender roles that we have, women are responsible for certain roles within the home. From rural communities, they need to walk long distances because water is now scarce. They have to walk long distances to fetch water. And in other areas such as Riga, where we've got a lot of wildlife, women are exposed to such risks. Again, if they're walking long distances, how else can we expect them to contribute to other economic activities that can contribute to the needs of the household? How can we expect the women to participate in critical decision-making spaces when their time is being spent in what is not properly recognized as unpaid care work? The burden is increasing for women, and the burden is increasing for these disproportionately affected communities. Again, we realize that nothing is being done at that level, and these voices are not adequately amplified to make sure that people understand the realities that are being faced. It is people sitting in big spaces, committing to figures, and nothing is done. Should we wait for 2035 to wait for us to count whether the 300 billion has been reached, as we have done with the 100 billion? 2030 is coming soon, but we did not even manage to reach that goal. I think it's time for us to push for commitments to the climate finance goals. It's not just about what's on paper or what is agreed at these big conferences where people like to look good and say the correct things, but we need to actually put commitments into action. We need to develop campaigns to raise the importance of climate finance by amplifying the voices of those affected from the developing countries. We've seen floods, we've seen disasters happening in different countries. We can't continue to feel sorry and not do anything about it. Nationally determined contributions, which is what every country sets out to do, to say we'll reduce our carbon emissions by so much by a particular period. We need to hold our countries to account. The more carbon emissions we have, the more we're going to have a climate crisis. It's important that we meet these nationally determined contributions and we keep our governments accountable to them to commit to what they've set out to do. The just energy transition, where we are saying, let's move away from fossil fuels because they also contribute to carbon emission. What can we do to utilize our renewable energy sources? This is a critical step for us to be able to move towards a greener economy and to work towards cleaner energy sources. Again, we need to empower local communities to adapt to climate change. What skills are we transferring to them? What financial resources are we giving to them to make them able to mitigate whatever they're doing? For example, if they're still using the same agricultural methods that they've been using that are not sustainable, that really contribute to issues of climate change through deforestation, through indicating things that they have not been educated about, it is important for us to support mitigation projects. Waste management is one of the key areas that they can plug into. It also contributes to an economic upliftment of the household coming from those perspectives. We also need the private sector to play a role. Mining companies, banks, different actors within the private sector need to also put their hand within issues to do with climate finance. We cannot continue to stress enough how much it is important for us to get adaptation funds. As I've said, it doesn't take a lot for you to realize that climate change is real. Just step outside, feel the heat, or wait for the rainy season where we have a lot of farmers here in Zimbabwe waiting for the rain, those that have planted their agricultural produce actually drying out because of climate change. It is important for us within this platform to begin to campaign within those spaces. Climate change is real. The legislative processes are there, the policies are there at the national and international levels. It is time to amplify the voices of the affected communities so that we get the much needed climate finance for us to adapt to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We said we are going to engage you. I will now ask Edwick.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Mtata. and good afternoon to you all. So I'll be speaking about the importance of safeguarding rural women and how we can strengthen their position through increased access, agency, peace and security in alignment with the Beijing +30 theme of advancing gender equality and empowerment of all women. I must say that as we mark the 30th anniversary of the Beijing platform, we must reflect on the progress that has been made and the challenges that persist, and especially for rural women. I'm happy that Michelle was also okay, fine. So I was just highlighting that I'm happy that Michelle has already set the tone when she was talking about the challenges that are being faced by rural women because their livelihoods are actually based on, the natural ecosystem. And you realize that while their livelihoods are based on the natural ecosystem, they are very marginalized and they've got a lot of barriers that are affecting, them realizing gender equality as compared to most women from urban areas. So what do we need to do? First of all, I think it's very important that we should ensure that we bridge the gap. How do we bridge this gap that we are having? The first is to ensure that rural women have got access, to resources and the services that they really need to actually attain real empowerment. Because I'm sure all of us in this room, we can agree that rural women are disproportionately affected when it comes to access to education, when it comes to access to healthcare, when it comes to access to economic opportunities and technological tools. We recently came out of the COVID-19 and, when almost everything was happening online, most rural women were really affected because they did not have the technological tools, to be attending meetings online, actually to be trading online. So that was a challenge, and it still is a challenge. And actually, COVID-19 just made us to realize how, rural women actually are being affected by the lack of access to technological tools. And then we talk about education. This is really a challenge for most girls and women that are in the rural areas because of the lack of resources. And right now we're talking about the climate crisis, where they get most of their income from, agricultural activities. So you realize that when agriculture is affected, it's actually also going to affect most rural girls. I come from the Midlands province. The Midlands province, mining is the main economic activity. And usually if you go to the rural areas, because of the failure of agriculture, you find out that most households are now relying on artisanal mining. But then it is not something that we are really proud of because we are having young girls being abused. We are having young girls being married off to artisanal mining, to artisanal miners. We are having women being abused in these artisanal mining sites. Why? Because we can all go back to the factors about the climate crisis, their marginalized positions. So if you ensure that rural girls have got access to education, will be, actually ensuring that the future generation will actually be really ensuring that they can have, great strides to economic empowerment. And then talking about the urgency of women, I'm glad that the speakers before me talked about why it is important to have women not just participating, but effectively participating. And if you look at rural women, Michelle was highlighting that they are spending most of the time, looking for firewood, spending most of their time. They spend most of their time doing household chores. While this is, we take them as, most of in our African context, they regard them as duties that are supposed to be done by women. But then you realize that we are robbing these women of the time that they are supposed to be taking, participating in key decision-making platforms. Right now, we are talking about the issues to do with the resources, but then these women are not represented in the platforms where the actual decisions on supply and management are made. yet the results from those decisions, they affect these women directly. So it is very important that we ensure that we have women really participating in decision-making platforms. During my research, I discovered that women in rural areas are actually everybody what Reverend was calling tokenism participation. Where policies are being made, women are just called out, we're doing these consultations, and then women would be just gathered there just to tick the box to say that women were there. In most cases, they don't even understand the policies that they are really actually being said to be consulted on. We talk about water issues right now. We're talking about the issue of how climate change is contributing to water scarcity in these areas. If you read the papers, you hear that rural women were consulted. But if you go to the rural women and you really ask them, what were you consulted about? Do you know about the policies that guide water provision and water supply? They don't even know. So it's very important that we shun away from just tokenism when it comes to the participation of women, by making sure that they really participate and they effectively participate. And this effective and meaningful participation is only possible if these women attain education, if these women are actually, given the education that they need to ensure that they can make decisions when it comes to issues that affect their livelihood. And most importantly, we need them to actually also participate in leadership, and not just participating, but meaningful and effective participation, so that they can advocate for policies that actually really contribute to their well-being. So when it comes to peace building, building sustainability and social cohesion, you realize that peace is both a fundamental human right, and it's also very, very critical for development in rural areas. But then, why don't we have more women participating in leadership? We realize that the reason why most women are not keen to actually participate in leadership is because of the violence that is associated, when it comes to those spaces. So conflicts, violence is also limiting the participation of women. And while we also have women as peace builders, we want to have peace in these communities so that we have women participating effectively in all the development processes. And then we look at the issue of security, protecting rights and livelihoods. So I should also emphasize that security is not just about physical safety as much as what we talk about when we are in our communities. Security is also about economic, it's also about social, and it's also about environmental stability. Michelle was talking about how women are being attacked by wild animals as they are fetching firewood, as they are fetching water, which is actually a critical thing that should be of concern in all the discussions that we are having. We talk about physical safety, we talk about environmental security, we also talk about economic security. And then when we are in these spaces, we realize that most women are not actually realizing that because of the harmful cultural norms that we have in the rural communities. So we need to dismantle these harmful cultural norms so that we can have, real security when it comes to the women that are living in rural areas. So reflecting on the achievements and challenges, since we are talking about the Beijing Plus 30, yes, as we celebrate this milestone, we realize that yes, we have some strides that have been made, but we still have a lot of challenges when it comes to real implementation. I'm glad that Michelle talked about how we have good policies, how we have good legal frameworks, but then when it comes to the actual practical implementation, we are still lagging behind. So it's still very, very important for us to continue raising awareness and to continue monitoring what our government are doing, so that we realize that all those things, that the fancy policies that we have and the fancy legal framework that we have are actually being implemented, so that rural women can actually enjoy the peace and security that they need in order for them to fully realize their equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edwick. We look forward to engage you. You've raised important issues. Now I'll ask the comments.
Good afternoon, friends.
Afternoon.
I stand here in fear and trembling because I'm going to speak after fiery sister activists. But I must also apologize for belonging to a gender that has always had access to these platforms, voice and space. And so I do not take it for granted that I received this invitation. I'm going to speak on partnering men and boys for gender justice. And I begin by saying, men, men, men. Our late, highly creative and brave sister and friend, Zimbabwe Madzimure, once addressed us roaring in laughter, as she always did. It must have been at a conference in Norway, sometime in May 24 to 27 in the year 2010, just to indicate how long I've been in the trenches. Someone said in one of these sessions, in which part of heaven are men made? There were some chuckles before Pumzile then intervened and said, are you even sure it's in heaven? Are you even sure that those of us who are men are being made in heaven? Sisters and brothers, this debate has stayed with me ever since. In which part of heaven are men made? Are we even sure that we who are men are made in heaven? In this just talk, I would like to talk justly on 5 points why we should still strive to partner men and boys in the quest for gender justice. I will raise the points from the theological, biblical, anthropological, success, and related points. So it's the TBASE model that I will share with us. And I'll speak very briefly because this space belongs principally to women. And as a man, I've get crushed this space. First, there are sufficient theological reasons for engaging men and boys in our struggle against patriarchy, racism, oppressive socio-economic political systems, as well as to resist conflict entrepreneurs and other systems of death. We need, because they are theological systems and reasons for this. This is because God, the universe, or the source of being, has the patience, love, and tolerance for human beings who are also male. I concede, sisters and brothers, that we as men are particularly responsible for much of the suffering that we find in the world today. But still, there are theological reasons why we should engage men and boys. Second, it is biblical to engage men and boys. The world that the Lord regarded as very good in Genesis 1:31 still included Adam. Although I don't accept this naive blame for Eve. Adam is a good example of how not to respond to questions. God asks Adam a very simple question. Adam, where are you? The question, basic question of GPS. His response, the woman you gave me. Still, colleagues, we need to engage boys and men because it is biblical. Third, there are anthropological reasons for reaching out to men and boys. For all our bravado, masculinist pride and patriarchal posturing, we who are male are very human. We feel pain, we cry, we get lonely and frustrated, and therefore need to be constantly engaged. Fourth, and I'm coming to my last point, second last, it is actually strategic to engage men and boys for gender justice. According to a proverb by the Babembe people of Eastern DRC, and I quote, if you tame the lion, the cattle will live in peace. End of quote. If it is actually effective to engage men and boys, Many faith-based organizations have been running transformative and positive masculinities programs. They are reporting heartwarming cases of men supporting women in family planning, engaging in climate change positive activities, responding positively to addressing sexual and gender-based violence, embracing cultures of peace, and so on. In closing, sisters and brothers, allow me to cite my former colleague, now late in the World Council of Churches, Ehaya, Andrew Luce. He would always say, and I quote, "The time for the active engagement of men and boys is yesterday. Tomorrow is already too late." I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ezra. Now, I will want to open this space for the response, first from the reference group members. But I think we have had a mouthful here. I can pick some few things that I think have been lifted up. Reverend Neshangwe used a biblical character that captures issues that she once lifted up in discussion on gender justice, questions of spirituality, femininity, and community. I have questions, many questions on these issues. Michelle narrowed it down just to finance, and then specifically looked at how climate financing can have gender justice components. And I think this is very important, and there are issues I think you have raised that will also elicit some important discussions. Edwick focused on one vulnerable group, which is the rural sector women. And I think this is something in our context where 70% of the population still lives in the rural areas. In many parts of the world, women in the rural areas are affected disproportionately to the challenges affecting women. And Ezra, you raise an important component, how men and boys can be partnered with so that we achieve our focus, our vision for gender justice. And you have a convincing proposal that there are grounds theologically, there are grounds biblically, anthropologically, strategically, but also there is evidence, there are results that show that such partnership is valuable. I will ask some questions after we have received the response from the members of the reference group.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mtata, for this opportunity. First and foremost, I would like to represent the Gender Justice Reference Group in commending our panelists this afternoon for the topics that you have independently brought to this space and the significance, the importance of what you have brought into the room for not only discussion, but for open dialogue and for ideas, testimonies, stories for us to share. I don't think it's necessary for me to reiterate what you have presented. Dr. Mtata has done that fantastically well. I just want to note that one thing I found interesting from all your speeches combined was that your topics intersected very well, and that you covered different aspects. Firstly, socially, secondly, politically, economically, and then we covered the theological aspects of it with some mentions from the spirituality of things. And I am thankful for that, because that's part of what the Gender Justice Reference Group is trying to achieve. It's not only focus on gender itself, but looking at other avenues and other perspectives, what context does gender fit into? And how can we in this reference group combat the challenges, combat the issues that specific contexts struggle with? And your speeches and your topics this afternoon brought very interesting ideas, and we're looking forward to the Q&A. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.